I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the San Luis Obispo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District Water Resources Advisory Committee, WRAC, for Wednesday, February 6th. I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and let's have a check on quorum. If you are a voting member, if you could please raise your hand.
Yeah, 21.
21. We have a quorum. Thank you all so much. And the next item, let's go on to the meeting minutes and the introductions.
Yeah.
We kind of
Everybody-
introduce ourselves when we're taking roll for the minutes, don't we?
That's all right, because that way it gives them a chance, if you're a voting member or not to be a voting member, to go ahead and say your name and your district. And we do have a couple of new folks, so speak clearly so that everyone knows. I'm Andy P., City of San Luis Obispo.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Linda Seifert. I represent District 3, and I'm the Vice Chair.
I'm Jim Gehring. I'm District 4 Rep.
I'm Lon George, City of Rio Grande.
Christine Mulholland, Environmental at Large alternate, serving today for Sue Luft.
Bob Lucas, Larry McGuire, yes.
Desi Lance, City of Grover Beach.
Bill Garfield, 2nd District.
Tim Walters, Development at Large. Jason Yeager, Ag at Large.
You could, just keep going around the back there. Yeah.
Giselle Naylor, District 4, Indy Henderson, Hospiro Mutual Water Company.
Lana Daniels, County Public Works. Brendan Clark, County Public Works.
Derek Buell, County Public Works.
Jay Blakely, Citizen.
Tony Western, Golden State Water.
Kevin Beck, Shannon, San Juan Water District.
Greg Graywall, 5th District Representative.
Tom Mora, RCD.
Patricia Wilmore, Pastoral Wine Country Lines.
George Kendall, County Farm Bureau. James Green, Farm Bureau.
Sophia Reposo, Oceano CSD.
Chuck Cecilio, Los Osos, CSD.
John Reed, Kim San Luis Obispo.
Eddie E. Napomo, CSD.
Greg Armstrong, Napomo, CSD.
Steph Wall, Environmental Alternate. Linda Chipping, Coastal San Luis RCD.
Michael Foreman, City of San Luis Obispo.
Jordan Hopkins, City of San Luis Obispo.
David Chipping, Environmental at Large. Eric Greening, also Environmental at Large.
And Ray Dienso, County Public Works.
All right, thank you all for being here. We'll go to the next item, which is approval of the December 5th, 2018 meeting minutes. We did not meet in January. Were there any comments on those meeting minutes?
I'm sorry, I'm just a granny grammar issue here on number 4, second paragraph, last line. It is actually Salinas River, not Salinas River, please.
Yeah, sorry.
And then on the second paragraph below that, it says member alternate C. Mulholland, and I was serving for Sue Luft that day, but then on the last paragraph of number 4, it says member C. Mulholland, so if you might want clarity there to put the alternate in that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments or changes for the meeting minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the meeting minutes as modified by Christine.
I move we adopt the minutes as amended.
Thank you.
I'll second.
I'll second by Jim. Thank you. And we will do a roll call for this one.
Alrighty. Dennis Laux. Bill Garfinkel. Linda Seifert.
Yes.
Jim Gehring.
Yes.
Greg Graywall.
Yes.
Kurt Bollinger. Jason Yeager.
Yes.
Okay, Tim Walton. Christine Mulholland.
Yes.
Eric Greeny,
Yes.
David Chipping,
Yes.
Linda Chipping,
Yes.
Tom Mora,
Yes.
Jamie Hendrickson,
Abstain.
John Reed,
Yes.
George Kendall,
Yes.
Anthony Lindstrom,
Yes.
Kevin Peck,
Yes.
Lee Nesbitt.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Andy Pease,
Yes.
Chuck Cecina,
Abstain.
Craig Armstrong,
Abstain.
Cynthia Raplogle,
Yes.
okay. And Charles Grace or Tina Meyer. Okay. Motion carries.
Did we do Lori Randy? Ron? She wasn't here.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, she would abstain, but she's physically here, right?
Barbara Harmon.
No. Lon,
Okay.
for City of Lori
But
Randy.
he's not a voting member yet.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, motion carries. Okay. We're going to go on to our ongoing updates. This is in the agenda packet with the information, but this is our chance to go down and see if there are any comments or questions, unless you had any opening. Starting with the rain and reservoir report.
I'm happy to say these numbers are obsolete
That's right. It's already outdated
in a good way.
in a good way. We've got a lot of great rains. Okay, any other comments on rain and reservoir? Groundwater basin management efforts? Yes, Greg.
On the Paso Basin, it just came out that there's also going to be a meeting March 6th, and besides the regular meeting for April 24th, the January meeting was canceled. And Heritage Ranch, according to the DWR website, which is part of the cooperative group, got their boundary modification. So I have a feeling that they're going to be no longer part of the board because the county will end up taking over that area.
I'm sorry, for which one? Which area?
Heritage Ranch,
Oh, yeah.
which is on the lake, because all their water comes from the lake, doesn't come from the basin.
Thanks. Any other comments on the on basin management? Okay, integrated.
Am I
Oh.
allowed to speak?
Yes.
Just one comment. I live in Oceano, and I noticed that our drinking water used to be 90% state water that came out of the tap, and we didn't get any this year. And I'm wondering, do you keep track of who gets a portion of a specific town's state water allotment? They said they gave it to the flood control.
I think the Central Coast Water Authority would keep track of that. You can go to their website.
Yeah, I
and they'll
called the
link you to that
Department of
information.
Water Resources, and they told me who they gave it to, but I'm just wondering where I could get the paperwork. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay. I don't, this is more about the Sigma management for the groundwater basin, so I'm just, but if anybody has an answer for you, otherwise.
Maybe I can.
All right, we got a couple hands up. Do you want to start? See if you have an answer.
I was just going to suggest that you talk to the Oceano CC.
I talked to the Department of Water Resources up in Sacramento, and they told me that they allotted the state water to, I believe it was the flood zone 3. I don't know if it was that or.
Yeah. So, and then otherwise, Mladen, do you have a quick response? Otherwise, I think this needs to go offline.
Yeah, just real quick to answer your question. Zone 3 is the flood control district that's staffed by the county public works department, and they are they have the agreement with the state to to provide state water to subcontractors, and Oceana CSD is one of the subcontractors.
So it goes from Department of Water Resources to Zone 3?
Correct.
So, Milan, can you maybe just provide your contact information so you can follow up and he can point you in the right direction to get that answer? Sure. All right. Anything else on the Sigma on the basin management? Thank you. Okay. Integrated regional water management. Do we have anything new to add on that, Milan? Okay. Yes? No? Okay. Stormwater resource plan? Any comments, questions, concerns? All right. Various county water programs, policies, and ordinances. Yes, Eric.
In addition to what we see listed in our agenda under that category, we should be aware that on March 12th, the county supervisors, as part of their look at and action on various housing programs, are actually also going to be looking at and likely taking action on proposed changes to the county's CEQA guidelines that will affect all projects, not just housing projects. So it's sort of slipping through. It's had no planning commission review, and we haven't had a chance to actually see it. We can now see some hints as to what it's going to contain by going to the website of the County Department of Planning and Building, then click on Active Major Projects, and then click on CEQA Guidelines Update, and there's a recent update that updates the obsolete information that's otherwise there that shows what staff will be recommending, much of which involves giving applicants opportunities to be part of the process that, depending on how it's worded, and we can't yet see how it's worded, if it's offline from the public process, it might be problematic relative to the public's ability to respond. And certainly the one that appears to give applicants a role in the selection of EIR consultants who should be impartial, that one certainly raises flags. But and again, until we can actually see the exact words of the proposed policy changes, which will likely come out in the supervisor's agenda packet about March 6th, which, in other words, we might or might not have seen them before we sit down at our next meeting. But anyway, this can affect all sorts of projects.
Okay, so something to keep an eye on there. Linda?
Just through the chair, I think that if there are impacts to be made to the local CEQA guidelines that are about water, the assessment of water availability, quantity, quality, I do think that that's something that we would want to look at and perhaps make recommendations about. But I haven't heard Eric say anything.
What we have is sort of a shopping list right now of topics that will be covered or directions that it will go. It didn't seem to include that. What I was happy not to see was dickering with thresholds of significance, because there tends to be a push now. Historically, CEQA is based on you measure your impact based on the baseline of present conditions, and there has been a kind of a fad for moving that baseline up to compliance with some sort of plan or other, so that you can meet some addressed goal like more houses and so on. I didn't see dickering with thresholds of significance in the list, but of course they're not only going to be looking at staff recommendations, they're going to be looking at various recommendations of other groups. And you can go, when you get to the website, go beyond that update into the otherwise obsolete report. And for example, click on the link to the recommendations of the CEQA, what do they call themselves? The Sophie Treaters group. Anyway, you can link through to some other groups that are definitely going to be there and trying to sway the supervisors, who have some plans that could very well affect assessment of water availability, et cetera, et cetera. But even structurally, some of the things that staff is recommending could, to the extent that the applicants are able to work outside the public eye with consultants, it may be harder for the public to address and scrutinize and develop fair mitigations or press for fair mitigations if there's an inside track that the public won't have access to. So again, we need to look at the exact language when it comes out.
All right, thank you. Tim?
Well, I can weigh in on that a little bit because I've had some conversations with the supervisors and staff about the CEQA guidelines update. I want to be clear that this is a document that the county uses to interpret CEQA. It's not anything related to CEQA itself, other than they have a document that is from like 1995 that has never been updated. So there's been discussion about updating it to be more current and more aligned with the way things are done now. And most of the changes, to my knowledge, relate to real-time billing, choices along the way that are made relative to the process. There is nothing in there about mitigations or thresholds or any of that kind of stuff with regard to that interpretation. And most of that stuff has been taken off the table for reasons like Eric has stated. It's just too controversial. It's more about the process. So just heads up. But
Okay.
it is coming forward.
Good to know. Thank
Anyway,
you.
March 12th will be the hearing, and probably the agenda packet release will be Wednesday, March 6th, which is a familiar date to all of us. So we won't, even if we wanted to, we wouldn't be able to spin off a subcommittee to look at it or anything.
Right.
But some of us might or might not have had a chance to see it, and we probably couldn't take a meaningful action. But
All right, so,
as
okay, but if there's
individuals
something
and as
significant, then
jurisdictions, we can stay aware.
okay, but it will be prior to the actual meeting, whether or
Right.
not
They
you have the
usually-
agenda packet.
Usually
Yeah.
you can examine the supervisor's packet about 6 days before they meet. So
Right.
usually it's on a Wednesday for a meeting the subsequent Tuesday.
Yeah. Okay, great, thanks. Any other open reporting? And then Ray, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted also just to remind everyone here, there are a few at-large vacancies, mostly there's 2 alternate agricultural at-large vacancies. Sue Luft is also decided not to continue, but we're hoping that so Christine Mulholland has already submitted an application for that, but I was gonna propose, if no one else gives me an application for Sue's spot, I was gonna move forward and bring her to the Board of Supervisors for approval. Because typically when we get more than one application, we set up a subcommittee to do a review of the applications. But if Christine is the only one that's applied for that, then I was hoping that we would just move forward with it. So.
Does that need a motion for a recommendation?
I don't think we could act if it's not on our agenda.
Yeah.
But
I guess, yeah.
I don't think we object.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Ray,
Yeah.
so Christine is listed as the alternate on
I mean, she'll still be a voting member and all of that, so nothing's going to change. But what I guess then what we could do is I'll solicit for applications, and if we get some, I'll agendize it for approval before the WRAC, and then we can move forward with it.
I think.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was ag at large or environmental?
There's 2 ag at large, and then there's an environmental alternate that's an alternate for Eric, and then when we move Christine up to Sue's spot, then there will also be an alternate environmental. So there's essentially going to be 4 spots at the at large. Yeah.
So both of the ag at large seats are vacant or coming vacant?
They are vacant right now.
They are vacant.
Yeah.
And no alternates are available?
Yes. So
So, yeah. So
Yeah, I sent out a solicitation via email. I've sent a couple of solicitations already, and I've also noticed the Board of Supervisors about it, so if they know anyone that they wanted to recommend for the positions, and if you know anyone here, but we can agendize it for next month, and we can officially move forward with that. So.
Yeah, I think as a matter of practice, it's
Yeah.
appropriate even if we get a limited number of applicants to.
Yeah.
And by the way,
approve
the
our
name of
recommendation.
the entity that you can link to the recommendations of is the CEQA Working Group. It slipped my mind for a moment, but when you're researching the CEQA guidelines and go into the guts of the report into Planning and Building Department, you can link through, and some of that is quite eyebrow-raising.
What's it called here?
It's the recommendations of the CEQA Working Group.
But that group hasn't been involved in over a year.
Well, much of that report is obsolete, but then they stuck a more recent update on it, which is apparently coming from the sort of alliance that's been working on the housing projects.
But that's the one that you should really be looking at.
Yeah, but I have a feeling the CEQA Working Group is still going to show up. Well, we'll see.
Okay. And I think we also, Cuesta College, I think it's still vacant,
Yeah,
right?
Cuesta College is
reach
but
out
you know,
to them. They've been-
I have reached out to them.
Yeah, they're just not filling. If anyone has any contacts over at Cuesta to fill those vacant spots as well. Okay. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Now we'll have a report from the ad hoc subcommittee on additional water conservation measures that can be submitted to the Board of Supervisors for their considerations and consider actions. There's in your agenda packet is a draft letter from that committee, and I think Linda Chipping has been the chair and is going to kind of start off. If you could come up here and introduce us, walk us through where the process, the recommendations, and then we'll solicit feedback.
I'll give you just a quick recap and then turn it back over to Andy. To refresh your memories, the subcommittee was formed last spring. We've met 6 times. Usually our meetings last an hour and a half. The subcommittee members were George Kendall, Andy Pease, Linda Seifert, Steph Wall, David Chipping, and myself, Linda Chipping. We were very focused. We were absolutely engaged. Our meetings were informative, and they were full of very interesting and comprehensive discussions. We were often joined by county planning staff and the City of San Luis Obispo staff from their Water Resources Division. Ray joined us at every one of them. We discussed a number of water conservation measures. They're enumerated in that chart that's at the end of the letter. We brought those back to you after every one of our meetings. We received from you very valuable and constructive feedback and comments, and which we took under advisement and consideration and incorporated them as we could. We've arrived where we are today. We're here with this letter to the Board of Supervisors, which identifies 7 recommendations, and they're complete with justifications and reasons itemized underneath them. And we hope that as the Board of Supervisors consider them, that they'll utilize any number of those conservation measures which appear in the chart to help them meet some of those recommendations and suggestions that we made. So before I turn it back over to Andy, let me just say that now that I have my reading glasses on, I have caught all of those parentheses edits that are in the first 2 paragraphs. But if you catch anything else, let me know. And I also want to say it was a great pleasure to work with those people that were on the subcommittee. It was really a dynamic group, and it was a pleasure. And I thank them very much for their input and dedication to coming for so many meetings and being so open and so direct, and just, it was a marvelous experience. So with that, I hope that if they have any additions to add after this, they will, but I'll turn it over to Andy.
Great. Thank you so much, and it really was an interesting experience and process, and you know, we were kind of all over the place in the beginning, and so to be able to, with feedback from everyone, narrow it down to kind of 4 specific recommendations. And I think what I'm going to do is actually just take the moment for each, you know, address each one individually and make sure that that there's some agreement on that. But otherwise, before we kind of go down item by item, are there any big picture comments? Okay. Yeah, Tim.
I'm struggling trying to figure out the table. So what are you saying? Is this just people that you were just trying to identify where that particular line item?
Right. I think the idea here is that the kind of in the introduction we say that we've considered you know, measures in these 3 categories, and so the idea was to kind of capture the possible measures that could be applied, and here's each category. I realize the chart that the decreased demand is should be kind of that those first 2 columns in urban and agriculture are both in the decreased demand category, and then the ground.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so that's the formatting thing that we can correct. But that's the idea, is that we're trying to, you know, is it apply to urban agriculture, or is it more of a recharge kind of measure? Does that address the question?
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah, thanks.
Addressing that, and I guess we may get to it individually, but for example, I think the mobile irrigation lab could be very useful urban on turf, things like school districts, golf courses, cemeteries, etc. Often on a per acre basis, turf is a lot thirstier than a lot of crops.
That is a great point. Thank you. I think we could certainly add urban to.
I would like to, and I think sometimes urban areas are able to partner in funding more availability of this sort of scrutiny as well. So.
Okay, terrific. Yeah.
Does this table reflect how the portion of drinking water is affected, whether it decreases or increases? And drinking water means potable water coming out of the tap.
It does not differentiate between potable and non-potable water, I would say at this point. Unless there's a specific remark about recycled water, the assumption that everything is.
So if I understand you right, the portions of urban versus agricultural versus groundwater categories of water, it shows, you know, there's a column for decrease and increase, but there's no record for the decrease and increase of water supply for drinking water.
It's all potable, it's all drinking water.
Right. At this point, it's all drinking water.
Well, irrigation water is not drinking water.
It's potable.
Sure.
The water that we typically use, unless there are specific areas in which we're have a recycled water for irrigation, otherwise they're pumping groundwater, which is certainly potable.
Well, for example, in Oceana, we get water from Lopez State and groundwater that comes out of our tap. And a couple of years ago, 90% of the water that came out of our tap that a lot of people used to drink was state water, because the groundwater was so contaminated with toluene and arsenic. At least the yearly reports that they send out to the homeowners about what's in the water, it was so contaminated that they decided that, you know, it would be good to mix it with state water. But we don't get state water anymore, even though we pay for it.
Okay.
So that was my only question: is if there was a record, like a horizontal road.
I'm sensing like.
But what's the name of this
Sorry.
table? Do I refer to it as water conservation measures, or is there a title for the table?
Sorry, I'm going to try to focus this. I feel like you maybe have an agenda and some specific concerns or comments that are maybe going to be better at the end.
I just asked
the
a
last
question,
item.
and now my question is over. I just wanted to know what is the title of the table, so it can be referred to.
There's a title at the top.
Yeah, there's a title at the top. And at the our very last item on the formal agenda is the public comment for items that are not on the agenda. So that might be a time if you want to make any other comments.
Yeah, and when I refer to it, it's the WRAC ad hoc committee, water conservation measures chart.
Yes. All right.
Maybe the WRAC, if we adopt it as the WRAC at the end of this agenda item, it will become the entire WRACs, but we will still thank the ad hoc committee for creating it.
Yeah, that's a good point, though. If it gets adopted, then we should remove it from the ad hoc committee.
With or without any amendments.
Yes. Okay. Any other general comments before we go through the 7 recommendations? All right. So the first one is to convene a joint WRAC subcommittee to identify strategies to optimize water use and groundwater recharge in agriculture appropriate for our county. This, of course, came from all kinds of ideas coming up and us collectively recognizing that that is not necessarily our area of expertise, and ALAB does have interest in participating in this work with us. Any comments, changes on this first item?
Good idea.
Great. Item 2, recommend that WRAC work with the existing county partners in water conservation to identify and implement additional urban landscape strategies and best management practices. So Michael Borman for the city was participating in the group and brought our attention to this existing partners in water conservation, and there's kind of the 2 parts is what we envision. One is, can we do a better job of landscape irrigation, and there's a specific program potential, this watershed, did we not put the specific program in here? But anyway, it's a kind of a watershed water conservation training for landscape. And then also just, we have state law about irrigation for residential and non-residential projects that are non-agriculture. And enforcement is not as consistent as it could be, so just having jurisdictions share best practices, I think, is what the intent was on that one. Any comments, questions on that? Yeah.
I was wondering if this is going to be training aimed at landscape contractors or the general public, or...
Yeah, I guess they have 2, and we're trying to schedule. Jamie is working to schedule the person from Santa Barbara who's been implementing it with a lot of success. I think we ran the program here once, but it sounds like there's 2 ideas. One is for the homeowner, and then the other is for contractors. We kind of feel like landscape architects are already dialed in. They, they kind of know it. It seems to be the contractor implementation and homeowners is where we're seeing gaps. Michael, is that kind of fair?
Yeah, and I think we're lucky enough. Jamie's here; she can always add in. But there's kind of an interesting transition between when the landscaping plans have been developed and when they're handed off to the homeowner and the landscape contractor. The interpretation of those plans, those watering schedules, when to irrigate, when not to irrigate. A little lack of education there that we can improve on. And then also this just talks fundamentally about some design elements. Someone may make minor changes to their irrigation systems that are not permitted projects. I think it just pulls kind of everything in.
Go ahead.
Oh, I also wanted to mention I volunteer with Supervisor, our San Luis Obispo County chapter, and we also have an ocean-friendly gardens program that does this sort of thing. It's been primarily doing outreach to landscape architects and contractors to train them in water-wise principles in their designs. But there could be some synergy there as well.
Totally. Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. Eric, then Christine.
Another key element would be plant nurseries, both as sites to publicize for the general public, the opportunities to learn by the general public, but also perhaps to help nurseries learn to carry more water frugal stock, gradually, because essentially the public comes to the nursery and sees something cool and brings it home. And if the choices start moving in a water conservation direction, then that in itself will help form taste and develop good habits.
Good, thank you. Christine?
Yeah, my question is, with the letter having 7 different recommendation points or headings, and then the measures charts, conservation measures chart has 4 headings. Are these somehow consolidated to reflect, is the chart supposed to be reflecting the points in the letter?
Yeah, it sounds like we could maybe do a little bit of better clarification about the role of the chart. I think the chart was kind of a catch-all, no ideas are lost, but maybe we can kind of clarify that some of the items captured in the 7 are on the chart, but there's also other things that we just either didn't see as a priority or didn't have a mechanism to incorporate directly.
For instance, area number 2 in the chart, the 3rd point is fund public water conservation landscape classes offer rebates to attendees. And so is that picking up on what we were just talking about here?
Correct.
Okay, so that
the
importance of landscape training and these points. So yeah, maybe there is some way that the chart would be better reflecting the 7 points. You've got it broken into 4 points, so it's kind of confusing. It actually is as to how these are referring to each other or how this stands in your recommendations.
All right, good. Thank you. That's good feedback. Yeah.
Sarah, I was going to say the Irrigation Training Research Center does classes specifically for landscape irrigation. And I've said this before, but the important thing to remember about irrigation, it's about distribution, uniformity, and understanding of evapotranspiration. And these classes, you do have to pay for them. Do teach people that, and these are people that don't have to have a degree. These people are just off the street. So I definitely recommend looking into what they state about distribution uniformity and evapotranspiration and irrigation scheduling, and trying to identify sources for good practices.
All right. Sounds like when we kind of get to that point, we might want to have a little meeting of the minds about what are the available programs, the expertise, how do we want to target it, where the funding is, et cetera. So I think within that recommendation too is to kind of have that partners in water conservation taking point in coordinating that effort. So that's a good comment to make sure that we Tim, did you still have one on this?
I'm struggling a little bit because they're all great points, and I like it. I'm just worried that it's not specific enough to like a desired outcome for each of the goals. And maybe this landscape one is a good one. Where you could say something about what the desired outcome is. Develop a comprehensive list of landscape management to be posted on the county website. I don't know what it is. I'm just saying that it seems a little soft in that sense.
Okay, so
that's just my perception.
Okay.
I would also maybe think about how you might prioritize some of these things, because some of the stuff is pretty major, whereas other stuff maybe is low-hanging fruit that you could pick off pretty quickly.
Even amongst these 7, you feel
7.
Like there's some
like studying the fractured rock. That's huge study.
Right.
Type stuff.
Right. Well, and I think there's a sense that some of them are some of them are planting a seed, where others are, hey, this is kind of what we're going to be doing anyway, in terms of like the the RAC education. We're just, some of those will be happening. But,
Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, a good.
Love the A-Lab thing, though. That's awesome.
Bill.
It might be helpful if you added one more column to your chart.
Uh-huh.
And in that column, for each of the lines, put a box that says which of the seven points in the letter that particular subject refers to.
Okay. Yeah, that's a potential way to do that. Thank you, David.
I think these guys are making it too complicated.
Why don't you stand up and kind of
This
David's
is
chart?
essentially a letter that's programmatic, and we're talking about essentially setting up systems to analyze in a letter to the supervisors every single subset of things the systems might look at. Seems to be unnecessary. That if we start filling the letter with lots and lots and lots of stuff, then it becomes less impactful. So I would recommend keeping it at the same general loading of language that we have now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Greg, and back there.
I think a lot of the information that would directly benefit different water basins are already being done in the proposals to make the GSPs in those areas, which are the groundwater sustainability plans. So the GSAs that have gotten together and are having these meetings over the different basins are already doing a lot of these things to come up with what the water budget's going to be. And so the supervisors, they're all sitting on different groundwater GSA groups, and they're already doing a lot of this stuff. I think the letter's fine, and I think the intent's really good, and stuff like that. But I think a lot of these things are already being formulated into the GSPs.
Right, and we talked about that a lot as a committee. Like, is this for the non-Sigma basins, or is this for and there's a little bit of a disclaimer in the beginning of the letter that says some of these are, of broad interest, and some of them are going to be for the non-GSA.
Yeah, the fractured rock and a lot of the landscaping things and other stuff like that. There's a lot of people that live outside of the basin boundaries, which will help them because they're not paying attention to what's going on in the basin.
Right, and some of us are further out. The San Luis Obispo, it's like, well, if the city can do a better job of managing our landscape irrigation, in 2 years when we're really getting into the heat of the GSP, then we'll be that much better off.
Yeah, my landscape's mowed by cattle. So.
Yeah, very good. Any last comments? Eric, do you still want to chime in?
David, the purpose of this is not to have implementing policy. The purpose of this is to alert the supervisors to opportunities they can act on and develop the policy. So I think I agree with David that not getting too wordy and being punchy and to the point will get their attention. And my question is this then going to be essentially a consent agenda item that comes to the supervisors as a public document that the public also sees?
My thought would
be... We're just going to be a letter to the board.
Yeah.
So will it be posted on the slowcountywater.org site? I think it should have some visibility to the public as well as the supervisors. It's public business.
And I think we haven't actually talked about it. My thought was that I would actually show up and mention it, even if we send it separately.
Yeah.
And I can do it on public comment for items not on the agenda. But I think it'd be important. In fact, the supervisors have asked for a little bit more, visibility and connect.
If they know the public knows they have it.
Yeah.
Which either putting it on an agenda or speaking and having a place the public can find it, then that increases the pressure on the supervisors to act on it. What I don't want is to have them quietly receive this letter and no one but us knows they received this letter, and there will be no pressure from anyone but us to say, did you get this letter? Did you see it? Is there anything on it that you want to agendize, et cetera, et cetera? That puts us several beats behind where we would be. My ideal would be to actually have it as a consent item on an agenda that the whole public sees. And then they see it, they know it, why
Yeah.
not?
Okay,
We can consider that, yeah.
Yeah,
We'll-
we need to
we'll talk
make sure
offline
that
about
that
yeah.
works. Linda?
Just as an aside, don't we do an annual report to them?
Yes.
So it seems to me that this, in many respects, is our annual report for the year. I know there's other things we might want to add, but it seems to me that this forms the basis of that. I don't know when we make our annual report, if it's the same time every year, but I was thinking that this sort of becomes the annual report that we would submit for discussion.
Well, the annual report will be an agenda item next month.
Next month.
For this group
to talk about, and then.
I would love to have this separate. I would rather have it be a standalone.
And the annual report can reference it.
Right, after the fact, but I think that there's enough substance that requires action that I would rather have it be
It just seemed to me that in conjunction with the annual report might be a good time, but
yeah.
I leave that to.
Well,
The
it
annual
might
report could
coincide
link
anyway.
to it.
All right. Any other comments on I think we're still on item 2. We've covered a lot of other general remarks. Okay, going on to 3. Extend the implementation of water conservation measures to areas when designated as a level of severity 2 by the biennial RMS, the resource management system, rather than waiting until level of severity 3.
I think that's very important. I'm glad it's in there. It's almost like it should be number 1.
Yeah, I think,
If you see
I think
trouble
Linda
coming-
had it as the first item.
Right. If you see trouble coming, address it before it's here, and I think that's the spirit of this.
Is everybody
Obvious
covered?
common sense.
Yeah. Any other comments or concerns with that one? Greg?
Yeah, the only thing being on that committee is when you're looking at these level 3s and they're figured 15 years, there's no, in fact, over the Paso Basin, they made a recommendation with nothing to give the recommendation. They didn't show the safe yield of the water, so you don't know if there's surplus or not surplus. They're adding homes in an area, regardless of whether they have surplus or no surplus. They're not naming other water sources that they're going to use and stuff like that. So I think it's good, but there needs to be more information in the RMS that dictates why they're coming up with
that
whatever
level.
level of severity they're coming up with, whether it's high or low.
Okay. So we can leave this. Is that something that we actually need to look at, is how they, I guess resource management, not
Well,
necessarily.
the RMS already says this. It says that you're supposed to implement conservation measures to, prevent getting worse.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what we're trying to say there.
What we're trying to say, level of severity 3 means do something, but you're probably not going to catch up because it's gotten, the problem is coming sooner than what you're doing to address it can fully address it. And so level of severity 2 says there's a problem coming, let's address it now so that it doesn't get ahead of us.
The RMS already says that under level of severity 2.
Yeah, so this aligns with that.
But they're only required to implement water conservation measures if they're designated a level 3. And what we're asking is that they implement the water conservation measures at level 2.
So at level 2 currently, it's these are suggestions are recommended, whereas with 3 it would be required, and we're saying let's bump the requirements down to 2. Okay. Are we all right? Go on. Okay, 4, direct staff to plan, budget, and prepare hydrological studies for non-sigma basins and fractured rock sources where needed to identify water resource at-risk areas. Kind of again with the proactive planning in mind. I don't know that this will go anywhere, but it seems we recognize that it would be helpful if we did. Eric.
I'm very, very thankful that it's here. Obviously, we don't have the resources to study them all, and they're all over the place, and some of them are not in trouble, and some of them have no particular demands made on them. The prioritizing, however, maybe there should be something that says develop criteria, or we will agree to help you develop criteria for the high priority non-sigma or fractured rock areas that do need attention now, because we hear anecdotally from the public about such areas. There are a lot on the west side of the Salinas River, west of Paso Robles and places like that, where we're hearing people's wells are going dry and so on. So obviously what we're doing is saying we need to not ignore this just because Sigma has grabbed so much bandwidth. But that said, there may be one or two that need focus right now.
So develop criteria to evaluate and prioritize areas of study.
Right. Perfect.
Okay, we can certainly add
But
that.
you're saying that WRAC should be involved with that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we're giving this as a recommendation to the board. I would think they might want to bounce it back to us. We don't necessarily have to invite them to, but we could, you know.
Would we be helpful in that regard?
No, that's I
I wouldn't be, but
no, that's what I'm saying. I don't think we would be.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Perhaps
So
just add prioritize to the title.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And the prioritize may simply be the squeaky wheel of where they hear there's trouble.
to identify and prioritize. Is that what you're suggesting?
Prioritize hydrological studies. Prioritize.
Oh, plan, budget, and prioritize.
Prioritize.
And prepare, okay. All right, good. And then I think what we could do is, staff knows we're a resource. If they end up being assigned this work effort, they could certainly bring it back to us for feedback if we have areas that we could identify. Okay, great, thanks. Okay, 5, recommend that WRAC work with staff to formalize, maintain, and make available to all county water users a resource library of best management practices on water conservation, supply, and demand practices. This kind of came out of a lot of research, basically, that David Chipping did that found a lot of information and then some concerns of, do we have this in a unified kind of way? So I don't know that this is a particularly controversial item, but are there any thoughts or comments?
Well, I think it's a really good idea. I'm wondering if the place for that library is on the slowwater.org site.
That was the idea.
I think that was true.
That we would have a continually updated white paper.
Okay.
And ability to link it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like there are underlying studies and so on.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we could,
It will probably create its own heading within that slowcountywater.org, so it's easy to find. It's supposed to, recent documents
Right.
where.
But that's a good point. We could add that in there just so that doesn't confuse them going like, what, are you making another website? Okay.
Are
Great.
you building for a library?
Yeah. What are you asking for here? Any more comments on the resource library? Okay. A couple more here. Direct staff to analyze and expand groundwater recharge opportunities in both rural and urban environments. Yeah, so this is maybe, to Tim's point, this is maybe one of those a little bit vague, but I think the idea is looking at what are the barriers in some ways for groundwater recharge, what's within the county purview, are there opportunities that we can, take overflow during high rain events, et cetera.
Yeah. How much more could we have gotten out of the last week?
I know, and you watch it
we
go
had
down
done
the
what?
storm drain, it's just heartbreaking. Any comments on this? Greg?
I think you're going to have to identify with the state, because every time you try to do something with water, it lands on the ground, it runs on the ground, you move it, it's a diversion. If you don't have a permit for that diversion, you're going to get in trouble and get fined. It doesn't matter if it's a stockpile or whatever you were thinking that you were doing. And through the Cattlemen's Association and other stuff, it's in our paperwork all the time on what your diversions can be, how you can measure it, what you're using the water for, and so on and so forth. So if we could, I know there's, through the Cattlemen's Association, there's a whole number of guys that deal with the permitting process of what you have to do to get a pond, or what you have to do if you have a pond.
Right.
And so, I mean, the state is really big in regulating all that stuff.
Yeah.
Very expensive too.
Right. But I think there was some pilot efforts. George, do you want to talk about this one a little?
It is tough, but it can be done. And I'm thinking on the small scale, there are lots of opportunities. If you don't use the water, if you don't pump that water and store it, water your cattle or irrigate your crops, it's possible you can knock sediment basin and use them as recharge basin.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you can't and you shouldn't. It's just that there's a lot of rules involved that people don't know about, so they're going to hire a guy with a tractor because they saw this thing on here. They're going to build a recharge area, and they're going to dig a hole and make a pond, and next thing, they're going to be on Google Earth, and they're getting fined.
I think the word analyze, under direct staff to analyze, can include that. In other words, they're not going to be, they have to take these things into account in finding and developing policy around these groundwater recharge opportunities. And so I would hope staff would find ways to be helpful in giving landowners the tools to make it happen, including regulatory tools.
Right. There might be some, here's some best practices to, here's how it's structured in a way that you're not making a pond that's going to trigger something else. But
we don't use the pond for
right.
Recharge basin.
The sediment basin.
Yes, yeah, there you go.
A lot of the ponds mine were made before World War II, and the government helped pay for a lot of those because they wanted the water stored.
Right, yeah. Well, that's not what we're trying to do. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, George.
In the valley and various areas, of course, they're also going with flooding lands and orchards and just, but I'm wondering if we need to have any kind of a note in here that connects this to the right to pump that water back out. And that just because my well came up, so I can go ahead and pump deeper again or more water this year. And I understand that through SGMA we're going to have some controls on that, but we don't really have controls at this point on how much people can pump out of the ground. And we haven't really, and I don't see that, I'm wondering if we should connect this somehow with, our groundwater levels have been depleted. If we are successful in recharging, we can hope that they will come up. But if we're going to spend money and effort as a county to recharge the groundwater, then that water perhaps needs to be more fairly distributed if it's going to be pumped back out. Just a thought.
David.
That would run into a safe harbors situation. I think if you want to incentivize storing water, then the incentive might be that is water that, having stored, you could use. And the idea that you're spending money and storing the water and then the commons gets to use it will, I think, be less effective in getting maximum groundwater storage.
So you're thinking that individuals and private parties would be doing the groundwater recharge projects?
Yeah, you would hope so, that there'll be enlightened self-interest in storing as much water as you could on your land for your use later.
Steph.
So you're experiencing what we did in the ad hoc group right now. And I would say that given the experience as an ad hoc member, what I recall sort of as we were winding this process up was, this is step one, and a lot of the sort of follow-up and more detail and sort of dialing in some of these things with more specifics would be the next ad hoc group's opportunity.
Good point.
The difference between the two things is one is banking, one is recharge.
No,
banking.
banking is somebody else pumps it under your
No,
property.
that's somebody
and
else
sells
is
it.
storing it and gonna sell it. You have the beneficial right to use the water on your land. You don't have the beneficial right to transfer that water and sell it out of the ground. That's the law. So when you're banking water, when you bank anything, you're talking about making a withdrawal at a later date. When you're recharging, that water is there to just replace what you've been using. Two different concepts. One they use to make money, and one they use to protect the basin.
So is there a change in the wording you would like to see?
I think we should not go there. I don't think we should talk about things where water rights are involved and where transfers of water or pumping out and using, because it'll get too complicated too fast.
We're not talking about that here.
Okay, so, all right, so from a kind of foundational level, putting water back into the ground is kind of what we're talking about. What the implications of that are is a different story.
I do think that the point that was made that we probably ought to include, which we could do, is simply to make sure that there's some sort of regulatory scheme that evolves that will protect the landowner that does create these or that does utilize the opportunity to recharge, which I think was one of the questions.
I think there's three words that could be added that would cover this. Direct staff to analyze and expand physical and regulatory recharge opportunities in both rural and urban environments.
Is that helpful, kind of the exploring of regulatory? I'm looking at George here. Does that?
Yeah, anything to help communicate and explain, but yeah.
And then leave the regulatory part to what staff does, which they can come back to us if they need to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but the main point here is that we wanted, that's a water source that we're letting run off. That's maybe would be better use. Okay. So last one here, continue to support WRAC's inclusion of informational presentations on water conservation, recharge, and new water sources as part of the regular meetings. This has been, I thought Jason's presentation on the vineyard was excellent last time. I felt like we get a lot out of these when we have outside speakers. And so there were, 4 or 5 here that we listed as possible ones. That we're currently working on lining up. Any comments or questions on that one? Item 7.
Wonderful. And we might also just keep the door open to larger events such as the one we did on water law, where we invite the whole general public. I don't think we should commit to doing it all the time, but certainly keep the door open that this is also useful.
Correct. And
if
then
we could pull out one a year or so, it would probably be a great service to the community.
Right. Yeah. I think as those topics come up and we have committees willing to do the work to implement those. Any other comments, concerns? Just a little bit of a wrap up in that.
I move a couple of amendments on the chart. One I mentioned. The 4th line, Mobile Irrigation Lab, put an X under urban. And then the second one under number 2, I don't know if we need the word meter. It sounds like we'd be helping people buy water meters, but I think the idea is tiered rates for the water flow, isn't it? I mean, would it be clearer without the word meter, or is there something specific to meters?
Well, meters under urban, and we have urban meters, water use.
But we're talking about the price of the water that flows through the meter.
I'm squinting over to Linda or David. I'm not sure what our intent was on that one.
That was specifically talking about urban strategies that are used.
But it's about the volume of water, not the actual pricing on the meter itself.
Right, it's the volume.
Okay, so striking the meter, tiered water pricing structures. Yeah.
There's legal constraints on using tiered pricing.
Correct. It has to be justifiable, and we spent many sessions at the city.
Organizations are going away from it too.
What's that?
Most organizations are going away from tiered rates because of the legal ramifications.
Right. It's pretty minimal in what effective, but there are some things that you can.
Regardless of whether
justify.
it's effective, whether it's legal is the question.
It's legal if there's a nexus.
Well, it's legal, but it'll be, if you want to be challenged in court every time
Correct.
you do this.
You're right. So there's kind of we're seeing two schools of thought. So we might as
might
as
try to change
tiered
the
water
laws.
pricing structures as feasible. Just because if you can find the nexus, it is can be effective. But thank you. And I didn't. Sorry. Were there any other kind of specific comments about the measures chart? Okay. So I feel like the comments were specific enough that we could probably entertain a motion to accept this with the modifications as discussed. Or if people feel strongly that they want to see it again, we can do another revision and vote on it next time. Christine?
I want to say that the committee did a bang-up job, really. This is a lot of work, and I appreciate all that went into this. And I think for our purposes at this time, this should be forwarded on to the Board of Supervisors, hopefully under the consent agenda, so it would be made public. And I move that we support the work of the ad hoc committee and forward this draft now
as amended
with the measures chart to the Board of Supervisors.
I'll second.
Agenda item or where you mentioned that it was consent agenda?
To the Board of
I
Supervisors.
would like to see it as a public document.
All right, so
I'd like to see that, so I don't think we can require that in a motion, but
We can't require it, we're advisory, but we can ask for it.
we would ask that it be placed on a public agenda.
all right.
for-
So moved by Christine, seconded by Eric. Any discussion? Any further discussion on the motion? Okay. Can we do voice vote on this, Ray? Or do you want a roll call?
We can do a voice vote if you want.
All right. We're going to do a voice vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? All right. Motion carries. Thank you all so much. I think this is important work, and participation has been great. Okay, so next item is consider scheduling updates of water resources issues from each group or agency. Ray, do you want to kick that off, or do you want me to?
Yeah. So let me start it off, and then. So, as part of the in our bylaws, it does state that members are encouraged to provide an update on water resources relevant to each group or agency at least once per year. I know that hasn't been something that we've practiced over at least in the last few years since I've been here, but I think when as the desire of Andy and Linda, we've discussed that to get this kind of participation, part of the benefit of WRAC is we leverage all these expertise from different agencies, and there's things that are being done in specific agencies and or groups that not all of us know about, and it would be good that maybe some of these ideas can be shared. And we were thinking that this would be a good venue to do that. And so what I know, for example, even what Jason did with the ag practices at the wineries there, where that was very eye-opening to a lot of people here. And so we're hoping that even things like that can be shared. And what we're actually hoping too is that it can be agendized. Maybe we can put it on the schedule. It's not just more like, hey, let's think about it. Hey, that sounds good. But actually, I'm hoping that we can put it on the schedule even through this upcoming year to agendize it, to say, hey, I'm interested in talking about this in March or in the fall or whatever. So
And it can be, 5 minutes. It doesn't need to be a big presentation, but, if we can have our, environmental at large group, if we can have our, different entities, cities, districts, any of those types of things.
Andy?
Yeah.
I would expand that a little bit to say that even in the districts or the CSDs, the RCDs, whatever it is, whatever group is there, I wouldn't necessarily limit it to just like, hey, here's some cool stuff that we're doing, but maybe also touch on what the need is in a given area. Because a lot of us talk to supervisors, talk to staff and things like that, and it may be have limited influence, but if we're more knowledgeable about what the needs are, say, of the Cambria water system or whatever it is, or Oceano, we're able to pass that message on as ambassadors to this group. I think it would be helpful to know all that stuff.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tim. I remember when the city of SLO shared our needing to adjust our safe annual yield. I mean, that's, here we have a challenge and here's something that we're doing, or just, like you say, what the needs are.
Yeah.
So, Ray, what's our proposal? Are we just going to assign, or do we want people to sign up, or how do we want to do that? We could probably do maybe 3 at each.
Yeah, because
3 5-minute.
Like there's a couple of ways to approach it. It could be as simple as an ongoing update, a line item in the ongoing update, where someone, someone wants to share something. Say environmental at large wants to share this at, just something very simple like that. Ideally, I would like it to be an agendized item. Say, if there's some issues now that people would like to talk about, we can. But if you feel like you're not ready right now or even next month, we can just say, like, for the fall, I'd like to do this, or for the summer, well, not the summer, but for maybe in a couple of months, I'd like to talk about this. Something like that.
Right.
That's what I'm proposing that we should do. But
so I think how about if at the end of the meeting we'll put out a little list with a sign up for each month, and you can just put your name, and then that way you'll know, and then we'll just start agendizing it. But if you don't show up on something, then we'll just maybe kind of bug you and say, hey, can we fit you in here or whatever. So just because you don't sign up doesn't mean you're off the hook. It just makes our lives a little bit easier for you to be able to schedule your time. So after this meeting and after the next meeting, we'll just have paper up here, and March, April, May. We skip June, July, or July, August, whatever, and all the way up to the fall.
You're talking about something different than what we used to do. We used to have all the members give an update. Now you're talking about, are you talking about something specific? Yeah, you mentioned the environmental lives group, for example. I'm not quite sure how this is different from what we were doing in the last few years.
So what were you doing in the last few years?
You'd ask, Golden State or someone, come tell us what you've been doing, and there was a sort of regular roster, and these groups would come up, and.
As I said, it could be as simple as that. Like as part of the ongoing update, we'll say, each group shares what they're doing, what they're thinking about, or what's important to them. It could be as simple as that, but I would propose it to be a little bit more formalized, where there is a really good informational presentation from each group. And like I said, the presentation doesn't have to be a big PowerPoint presentation. It can be like a few minutes or so.
Eric.
Maybe in future months we add a subset to the next agenda item, discuss future agenda items, namely discuss future member presentations as a subset of that, and kind of schedule those the way we schedule the other things on the list.
Could be. Whoever wants to. Anything else? Is that specific enough? While we're here, does anybody want to know that they'd like to give a little update next month, that they're ready to? And then we'll do a sign up for the future. Okay, so we'll go to the sign-up method, and otherwise we're just going to bug you. Okay. Or if you see your name on the agenda, yes.
I thought the needs and challenges comment was actually a really good one. And so whoever we invite or whoever ends up, I do think that we always ought to ask them to include a needs and challenges aspect to their presentations.
Yeah, good plan. Right, that's how we'll be the most. Yeah. Okay, and then the last. And then just discuss future agenda items in general. So far we are working on for March or April it's in here somewhere. The Partners in Water Conservation, why am I not seeing that? The one about the watershed irrigation training.
Fifth from the bottom on areas of interest, Partners in Water Conservation update.
Yeah, I guess we were going to do one that was specific to the irrigation. But anyway, so that's kind of that idea. We're also working with we had a climate response symposium, and had a really great section on the impacts on water and drought. And so Regional Water Quality Control Board made that presentation. So we're going to ask them to come here and be able to talk about that as well. Anything else? There were a couple other things that we were...
Yeah,
the soils one.
There's Healthy Soils Initiative. There's a county legislative platform for water resources issues. We're possibly agendizing that in the near future here for even an ad hoc committee to look into that a little bit more. So,
okay. Eric,
something to add sometime this spring would be an update on whoever is able to update us and ability to form a subcommittee to prepare for review of the draft environmental impact report on the tunnel proposed by the Monterey County Resources Agency between Lake Nacimiento and Lake San Antonio. Sometime within the next 6 months, we will probably have that draft in front of us. I'm not sure what the protocol is for submitting comments as a WRAC on something where the county is not the lead agency, whether we should submit comments to the county in a public document. It would be nice to have it in the record that has to be responded to in an EIR. Maybe that's an idea that you could kick around with staff to know under what format. But I think we are going to have both a threat and an opportunity in that this tunnel would be sloping from Nacimiento to San Antonio. In other words, it would take water away from usability in this county to water being stored where we would never see it again. But fair mitigations might go so far as opportunities to renegotiate the agreement between the counties that I think was negotiated to our disadvantage back half a century or more ago, both in terms of whether our counties' share could be recalculated upwards, or at least whether some kind of buffer that would protect maybe both counties, but instead of just letting everything go until you're at the minimum pool, and then oh gee. Anyway,
okay.
There will be a lot of issues. I think somewhere around April, May, one thing we're going to need to know is whether we'll need a special meeting during the summer. If the comment period lands between our June meeting and our September meeting, and we want to respond to it, we may have to come together during the summer. And I don't know who on county staff is plugged in with the Monterey County Agency, but if we can find out who they are and get that on maybe an April or May agenda, then we can form a subcommittee that's ready to jump in as soon as there's a document to jump into.
Okay, we can follow up on see what the timing is on that. David?
Just as a matter of interest, the beginning of this week, with the reservoir in the low 30s, we passed the elevation at which drawdown would begin. So that it has, as you may know, there's a lawsuit that's been formulated by residents around the lake in regard to loss of recreation and other such things if they were to maximize transport to San Antonio. And as water resources, we have never, ever, I believe, ever considered recreational resources under the purview of this committee. But in actuality, the supervisors will, because there's an intense economic load on not being able to use nacimiento water for recreational purposes. So I was wondering, as a matter of policy, whether we should debate whether this is a resource under the purview of WRAC worthy of intervention and discussion, not just on the water supply issue, but also on the economics. So I don't know what you want to do about that. But
right, but I definitely don't want to discuss it right in this time because it's not agenda.
But
as far as
a future agenda,
yes, that
is
we could,
recreation under the purview of
yes.
WRAC?
Yes.
It certainly is. Golf courses, for example, are a direct. For that matter, vineyards. I mean,
so
you can see that water has all kinds of
Eric, we don't actually need to solve that question, but we could. But I think it's an important potential consideration.
So I mean,
thank you. So, any other discussion on agenda items?
I do want to bring up one thing.
Sure.
Because, I think that it would be useful, and maybe this isn't really an agenda item, it's kind of a tangent, but I think it would be a good idea to have that report. Maybe that's the wrong word for it, but the thing that we're doing with the ad hoc committees, I think it would be useful to do that like annually, so that you could track how the stuff is happening. You know, you give it to them this time, and you go up and say, "Hey, I'm giving you this. Here's these 7 points or whatever." And then next year we do it again and say, so they actually see some tangible. So we can say, "Hey, what happened? You guys haven't done anything." Or,
and a lot of them, right, and a lot of them are on us. So, hey, here's an update of, what we've been able to do since that last
It may take a few years, but ultimately you might have you might get make some inroads.
Yeah, could be. Good, thanks. Any other general comments? And then now, and we just fold into public comment. Any other comments for items that weren't on the agenda, etc.? Patricia?
Yes, I do want to add my thanks to the ad hoc committee, and I particularly want to appreciate their outreach to ALAB, because the agricultural community, of course, is extremely interested in water, and I appreciate under number 1 using the term economic viability of agriculture, because we need to realize how important that is in this county. And then I also wanted to help you manage expectations in a couple of ways. One is that the water division of the county right now is so focused on the Sigma plans that have to be turned in, ours for the Paso Basin by next year. It's astounding how quickly that time is coming. So in terms of how soon they can get to these other types of recommendations, it may take a while, but I think perseverance is important. And bringing up again, as you mentioned, keeping these ideas in the forefront. And also, I, as a matter of my profession, read consent agendas, but I don't know who else in the world ever.
Eric, you and Eric.
So while this may be on a consent agenda, I totally endorse you going and
I'll
saying
still
some
comment on it.
comment. That would be excellent. Making sure that it's on the county's website. Also, if other agencies who are part of WRAC would be willing to put it on their websites, that will get it out to more members of the public, I believe.
Great, thank you. Any other public comments? Yes.
David Blakely, citizen, and I'd like to speak in favor of Mr. Green's effort to get the draft EIR on the Nacimiento the San Antonio Lake Tunnel project reviewed by this organization. As most of you know, San Luis Obispo County has an entitlement to 17,500 acre-feet of water coming out of the lake, 1,750 for around the lake, and the rest being distributed down the Salinas Valley and into San Luis Obispo. My rough calculations, and I want to plead a lot of ignorance in this issue, as I'm trying to get up to speed on the operation of the reservoir and other issues surrounding it. The users down the Salinas Valley and into San Luis Obispo use 15,750 acre-feet of water. The minimum pool at Lake Nacimiento right now is at 12,000 acre-feet of water. So right off the bat, I'm visualizing that there's a deficiency in the reserves for the water users in San Luis Obispo County, and see the draft EIR as a potential vehicle to ensure that we do have adequate reserves given droughts that we've been having and climate change issues such as that. I'm not interested in getting more water for San Luis Obispo County, but I am interested in making sure that the water that we are getting continues from Lake Nacimiento as communities continue to rely more and more heavily on that water resource. So I hope that this body agendizes it, takes a look at the draft EIR, and checks to see if there are opportunities to increase and to codify a greater reserve for San Luis Obispo County in that way.
Great, thank you, David. Greg?
Just to add to that a little bit, when we're talking about best management practices and the water that's in that lake and who gets what water out of that lake, the water is not used on a regular basis. The water's sitting there because people that have the right to that water say it's too expensive to use, and they're pumping groundwater and using state water in lieu of that water that's sitting there. So ever since the pipeline's been finished, that water's been wasted. It hasn't, and you can go to whatever agency gets that amount of water that they get out of it. They never use 100% of that water first before they use their other water. An example is Paso Robles has a cleaning facility of 2,688 acre-feet of water, yet they have 6,488 of water. There's no way they can clean 4,000 acre-feet of the water they have. So it's sitting there being not used, and instead of making a facility, which they should have made at the source for everybody that was a contractor, that water would have been cleaned, would have been used first, and your other resources would have been used as a backup. So that should be part of your information that you'd like to know on why isn't your community using that water first, and why aren't all the other communities using that water first in lieu of pumping.
I tend to think that's a different topic.
No, I think that's part of the lake.
As far as the specifics on the tunnel, but there's certainly consideration.
Well, I was on the committee, on the subcommittee looking at the tunnel. This was back in 14-15 on the Paso Robles Advisory Committee. That tunnel at that time was estimated to cost $60 million. They came from Monterey, showed us the whole project. There is a minimum that they're supposed to leave the lake at for the recreation, because San Luis Obispo County does have the right to the recreation, even though there's 400,000 acre-feet of water and they only get 17. Bad deal. And a lot of that water was being let out at a rapid pace this year, not for seawater intrusion, but to put somewhere else because they're building more homes. So there's a lot of different problems. They don't have the easements or the right to put the tunnel under the other people's property that are up in that part of the county that they'd have to go under to take it to San Antonio.
So I'm seeing that this Nasi and the tunnel kind of future agenda item.
The same person, Montgomery and Associates, that's doing the GSP for the Paso Robles Basin is also in charge of doing the GSP for Monterey. So Derek Williams, who's running that, there's a meeting, I said March 6th, and you might want to bring that question up to him on what they're thinking about doing, since he's doing the GSP for Monterey, or getting a card from him or something. You can look him up on Google and get some information on what they're doing with their amount of water and if they're proceeding, because they were trying to look for grant money to do the tunnel. They don't have the money to do the tunnel.
Sounds like
So-
a presentation waiting to happen.
Yeah, sounds like a presentation waiting to happen, and because it's not on our agenda now, I want to limit the discussion because we can't accidentally be.
Our county might have the
So-
information that they had at that time that we gave
Right,
at the
I-
Council
we-
Basin meeting.
I think we can certainly find folks to be able to share some information. All right, anything not Nasi related?
I think a round of applause to the sky for the last week's delivery.
Not sure it's going to appreciate it, but.
Thank Heidi for letting us use this as our venue.
And thank you as well. You're
Yes,
as
I will
integral
thank
as-
Shannon Sims, our scheduler, for making this magic happen.
Are we going over here regularly? Or
No, it was just a conflict, but
Yes. Next
that
month
is
we'll
a
be
good
here.
point.
Next month we'll be here.
So next month we'll be here, and seeing no further comments, this meeting is adjourned until our next meeting, March 6th at 1:30, here again in council chambers, and next time we'll be here. Thank you.